Let's finish up the season of Advent by looking at our last Advent theme, and we're going to look at joy. Joy is associated with Christmas, but probably for the wrong reason. I remember as a kid growing up, I loved Christmas. As a kid, didn't we all love Christmas? It was about joy, but the joy was about going to bed on Christmas Eve. And in our family, there was just a few presents under the tree. We would wake up the next morning. My sister and I would come downstairs very early in the morning, and there would be piles of presents. And we were just all excited and happy. I remember one year there was a train running around the tree. I mean, that's the classic thing, right? One year we had a hamster cage set up. Remember the Habit Trail? I'm dating myself, but that goes way back. Well, when we were kids, they had this thing called the Habit Trail for hamsters, and they had all these tubes and little cages and that was put together. So I loved Christmas as a kid. It was all about the presents and the joy of unwrapping those presents. Then as a parent, you experience it from the other side. I thought that was kind of cool because now we get to surprise our children and we get to see the joy on their faces. If any of you looked at our pictures from Christmas on Facebook, you realize that we still have a lot of fun with Christmas. And you might think that for us, Christmas is all about throwing paper because there's like a million pictures of us throwing paper out, or wrapping paper, we throw it, and tissue paper out of bags, and we toss it. And we just make a big fun deal out of it. We want to have fun. And so we make it fun. And we still enjoy it. We have a lot of fun. But then something happens. After you've spent all this time buying presents and wrapping them, and then like later that evening, you see your kids sitting around twiddling their thumbs, and you say, "What's wrong?" "I'm bored." "You're what?" Santa spent how much money on these presents, and you're what? You're bored? And so but it doesn't just happen to the kids. Post-holiday blues is like a real thing. It happens to people. You think about it. We've spent the last at least 1 month buying gifts, decorating our homes, going to parties, going to church services, and all of these festive things. But then over the next week or so, people are going to start taking down their decorations. The lights will come down. When you drive home, there won't be all these pretty lights. When you go into your house, there's no tree, there's no lights, there's no decorations. It's plain again. And you're starting to crash and come down from all of the frenzied activity that you were in during the holiday season. And so the post-holiday blues start to set in. And it doesn't affect everybody, but it does affect some people. And a lot of people have struggles with this. I think that we could really help with that if we started to focus more on the reason for Christmas. If we, instead of putting our joy into Christmas and the packages and the festivities, and instead we focus more on what Christmas really meant, then maybe the joy would be longer lasting. Because a lot of times what happens is maybe you didn't get that favorite gift that you were thinking you might get. Or maybe your favorite food didn't turn out like it should have over the Christmas meal. Or maybe that relative that you really wanted to see couldn't make it or didn't show up. For whatever reason, your Christmas was a letdown. But if we focus instead on the true meaning of Christmas, I'm not saying don't have parties and presents and decorate. Look at our church. We've got more trees here than probably all of us have at home. I love all that stuff. I think it's wonderful. But somehow in the midst of all of it, the point of Advent is to focus on Christ and His coming and the meaning behind what Christmas is all about. Because that way, if we think about those things, our joy ends up being connected with Jesus rather than the presents or the external things that surround Christmas. And then after all the packages are unwrapped and all of the lights come down and the people go home, the joy is still there. Because we still know Jesus. We still know why we celebrated to start with. So here's what I want us to do today. I want us to look at the New Testament and kind of journey through and see the joy that Jesus brought by his coming, and see how that joy is connected to us today, how we can experience his joy in our own lives. We're going to start by looking at Luke chapter 1, verse 42. Before Jesus was even born, Mary was pregnant with Jesus, and her cousin Elizabeth was also pregnant. She was a lot older than Mary. And so Mary went to go see her cousin Elizabeth. Elizabeth was pregnant with John. We all know him as John the Baptist. And so when Mary showed up to Elizabeth's house, what happened? The baby inside Elizabeth, John, jumped because Mary had showed up with Jesus in her womb. So before Jesus is even born, he's bringing joy. Listen to this. Verse 42, in a loud voice she exclaimed, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the child you will bear. But why am I so favored that the mother of my Lord should come to me? As soon as the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the baby in my womb leaped for joy." Leaped for joy. You know, as I was preparing this message and I was contemplating on this scenario and thinking about Mary walking up to Elizabeth, and all of a sudden Elizabeth feels her baby, woof, jump inside of her. I got chills because I was thinking, wow, how awesome is that? Jesus is bringing joy to people before he even is born out of the womb. Wow, that's amazing. Then after Jesus was born, imagine the joy that came to a little small village in Bethlehem, because that's where Jesus was born. Out in the field, there were shepherds, and they were on the night watch, watching over their sheep, when all of a sudden angels showed up, announced to them about Jesus' birth, and they all sang. And can you imagine taking all of that in as a shepherd, just out doing your job? You imagine you're a night watchman, and all of a sudden you see a band of angels in the sky singing, and whoa, what is that? And then they found Jesus, and they were overjoyed. Look what it says in Luke 2:10. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid, for behold, I bring you good news of" what? Great joy, which will be for all the people. Good news of great joy. Jesus coming brings joy as he's born. Then, after Jesus was born, sometime later, wise men came to see him. How many wise men were there? We don't know how many wise men there were. It doesn't tell us in the Bible. Everyone says 3, but we don't know that for sure. They brought 3 gifts, and so we assume there were 3 guys. I mean, what are you going to do, show up without a gift? So, but maybe 4 guys had gold, and 3 of them had frankincense. You know, I don't know how many there were. It doesn't really matter. It's not the point. Why did I bring that up? Okay, wise men show up. We don't know exactly we don't know a lot about these guys, but we assume that they're from the east, somewhere around Persia. Maybe there's Zoroastrians. They study astronomy, and these guys are looking in the heavens, and they know the movements of planets and stars, and they're looking for meaning but between the things that happen in the sky and the things that happen in the world. And so they were trying to connect these things together, and when they saw something unusual, they thought it had significance for what was happening on earth. So they saw this sign of some kind of star. We still don't know what that was. We have no idea what they saw. I think probably it was something miraculous that God created just for them to see. But it led them all the way to Israel. Can you imagine them getting to Israel and finding Jesus after who knows how many weeks of traveling, maybe even 2 months of traveling on foot to get there and find him, not knowing for sure what they were even going to find, but they're just going based on, we think there's something going on. Anyways, they reached Bethlehem, and Matthew 2:10 says this, when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. They rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. The wording of that is interesting in the Greek because it literally means rejoicing, rejoiced, great, exceedingly. It's those 4 words together. It's like 2 words for rejoice and 2 words for great. It's a way of saying, and some translations translate it this way because that's what it means. It's a way of saying they were overwhelmed with joy. I mean, they were they were flabbergasted, overwhelmed. It was over the top. Their joy was exceedingly great when they found Jesus. I can imagine it must have been after their long journey and uncertainty and not knowing what to do and where to go and what they were going to find when they got there. But they put so much effort into it. All of their planning and all of their hard work of traveling for hundreds of miles through desert and mountains and who knows what to find Jesus in a tiny village of Bethlehem. The question I have for you and me is this: how much effort do we put into seeking Jesus? Do you search for him in the morning when you wake up? Do you look for him before you lay down at night and go to bed? Do you search for Jesus during the day when you come up against a struggle or a problem that you need help with? Do you search for Jesus when you're hurting and in pain? Do you search for Jesus just for the pure joy of knowing him deeper and more? How much do you and I really search for Jesus like these wise men? I think that the more we search for him, the more we'll find him, the more we'll understand him, and the more real he becomes to us, and the more that joy that's in our heart will just be expanded. We need to search for him. We need more joy. If we want more joy, we need to find more of Jesus. I want to challenge you over this next year to make an effort, a stronger effort, to search for Christ more in your daily life. Whatever that means for you, and you know what that means for your life, find some way to search for him more. Now, after he was born, he went out and started doing ministry. And remember, we said that John the Baptist was in his mother's womb and leaped for joy. Well, John had the privilege of setting the stage for Jesus before he came out and started doing ministry. John started going out and preaching about repentance and turning away from your sin and asking God forgiveness, and he was baptizing people, doing that sort of thing. Well, with his preaching against sin and so forth, the people started thinking, well, maybe John's the Messiah. But he said to everybody, no, I'm not the Messiah. I'm just getting you ready for him to come. So here's what he said. John 3:28 through 30. You yourselves can testify that I said, I am not the Messiah, but am sent ahead of him. The bride belongs to the bridegroom. The friend who attends the bridegroom waits and listens for him and is full of joy when he hears the bridegroom's voice. That joy is mine, and it is now complete. He must become greater, I must become less. John uses a metaphor, an illustration that you and I can understand. He says it's kind of like Jesus is the groom and I'm the best man. I'm his best man, and when I see his face light up when he's introduced to his bride, I get the joy of being there with him when that happens, of him being introduced. And so John kind of puts it that way. He says, it's my joy and my pleasure to be a part of this whole process, to be a part of this whole festive occasion. And you and I can be a part of it too. How about us introducing Jesus to somebody else? We would get to experience the same joy that John the Baptist understood when he was introducing other people to Jesus. We can have that same joy. Introduce other folks to who Christ is, whether it's a friend or coworker or a neighbor, whoever it is. And here's the thing. John was willing for Jesus to become more important and more significant than him. And he was willing to step aside out of the limelight and fade off into the shadows and let Jesus become important. Are we willing in our own lives to let Jesus become more important and more famous than us? That's what we need to do. We need to let him receive the credit and the praise and the glory for everything. Now, imagine what it was like for Jesus walking around in the land of Israel, performing miracles, doing all kinds of amazing things. Imagine what it would have been like to be there, maybe as his disciples or even as the crowds, watching Jesus perform miracles. He did incredible things. Look at what it says in Matthew 15:30 through 31. This is just typical of what was going on. Great crowds came to him, bringing the lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, and many others, and laid them at his feet, and he healed them. The people were amazed when they saw the mute speaking, the crippled made well, the lame walking, and the blind seeing, and they praised the God of Israel. Imagine what it would have been like to be there in that crowd and see Jesus giving sight to the blind, hearing to the deaf, and making the lame walk, and even on those occasions when he raised the dead. I mean, that must have been astounding. But he still does that. He still heals. He still creates miracles. How many of you have experienced God's healing in your life? You've raised those hands. All right, see? God's still doing miracles. How many of you have experienced God providing something for you that you needed when you didn't know where it was going to come from? Anybody experience? Oh, yeah. See, look at all those hands go up. We know what that's like. God is still doing miracles. And the joy is still coming to us because God shows up in our life at a point when we really need him, and he just, boom, something miraculous happens. An incredible happens. God's still doing miracles. Now that's a joyous thing. I can assure you, and we all know that from experience, how joyous it is to experience God's miracles. I believe that we ought to continually rejoice in what God has already done, but also anticipating what he's going to do next. We don't even know what he's going to do next. Who knows? It might be greater than what you've seen him do in the past. I believe God is never going to stop doing miracles for us because he loves us so much. And he's an incredible God, and we haven't even seen the slightest tip of his greatness. He is incredible. Now, there's another side to this joy of us receiving from God, because we also have to walk in obedience in our lives if we want to receive the full joy that Jesus wants to give us. Here's something in John 15, 9 through 11. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. Sometimes, now I'm not saying this is true for every case, but there are some times when you and I are maybe not experiencing the joy that we think we should, but it's because we're walking in disobedience. We're being rebellious. God has spoken to us. He's told us what to do. We've disobeyed. We've walked the other way. We've refused to listen to his voice. We've refused to do what he asked us to do. And then we struggle to experience joy. But if we understand what's going on here, how can we experience joy when we're being disobedient? I don't know about you, but in my house growing up, when I was disobedient, I didn't have any joy. That was not fun because I got the belt, and I got restricted from everything. And so, my parents actually took away toys. We didn't have all the nice toys that kids have today, but they took what little we had, my rocks and my sticks, and they took them away. No, I had more than that. But, that was not joyful. And when we're walking in disobedience to God and not doing what he says to do, I'm just telling you, that's not a joyful thing. And sometimes there's a reason for us being miserable. It's because we brought it on ourselves. So maybe we need to stop and think sometimes. Like I said, it's not always the case, but perhaps during this new year we can make that another one of our goals, is to walk in obedience to God. And when he speaks to us and we hear his voice, instead of pushing it off and trying to ignore him and going, la, 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 I can't hear you, God. Instead of doing that, let's obey. Let's just do what God says, and let's see what happens when we're obedient. I think God will surprise us. I think it'll be amazing. All right, let's move along. There's joy in Jesus coming. There's joy in his ministry then and today. And then there's joy in his resurrection. Now, the disciples had some amazing times with Jesus. One of those times it was not amazing was when Jesus was carried off in the Garden of Gethsemane to his execution. that was not a joyful time. They watched Jesus being arrested. Some of them saw Jesus die on the cross. His body was buried. It was placed in a tomb. And the disciples themselves were in a locked room because they kind of felt like maybe they're next. And so they were very distressed, very upset. They were at the peak of excitement when this happened. It's Passover. There's crowds in town. Jesus made his triumphal entry into Jerusalem, and they expect him to rule and reign as Messiah and kick out the Romans. And I mean, they have all these thoughts of glory going through their head, and boom, Jesus is gone. Killed, executed, dies on a cross. So you can imagine the state of emotion that they might have been in. Now, some of the ladies wanted to go to his tomb, and they were going to anoint his body with spices and perfumes because that was their custom. Because, as you know, when a body decomposes, it starts to smell bad. And so they were on their way with some spices. But when they got there, something unusual happened because they couldn't find Jesus' body. It was gone. It was missing. But they found angels. Angels showed up and told them, why are you looking for Jesus here? Look what it says in Matthew 28, 5-7. The angel said to the women, do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he is risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now I have told you. Now, these ladies were probably in a state of shock and awe because they go to the tomb expecting to find a body. The body's missing, and instead angels show up. That's enough of a shock for any of us. And so they're confused, and at the same time they're joyous because the angel tells them this crazy thing: Jesus is not dead anymore. He's alive. Now, you and I, we've heard this all our life, but this is the first time they've heard this. For them, it's shocking. Look what it says, verse 8. So the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid, yet filled with joy. Afraid, yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Anybody ever had conflicting emotions? You know what that's like? Here's these ladies, they're like afraid. I mean, they just saw an angel. Jesus' body was missing. They're stressed out. They're freaking out. They don't know what's going on. And an angel shows up and says he's alive, but now they're happy, but they're still in shock. That's the original shock and awe. And so they're like, wow, this is crazy. So they run back to tell the disciples. Later on, Jesus showed up in a room with the disciples and just kind of popped into the room. Let's see. Luke 24, 41-43. And while they still did not believe it because of joy and amazement, he asked them, Jesus is in the room. He showed up, and they're just standing there, all the disciples kind of staring at him with their mouths open and eyes bugging out, not knowing what's going on. While they still did not believe it because of joy and amazement. Joy and amazement. They're happy Jesus is alive, but yet they're amazed because they don't understand this. How can he be alive? We watched him die. We watched his dead body go into a tomb. He asked them, do you have anything to eat? This is Jesus. Do you have anything to eat? They gave him a piece of broiled fish. He took it and ate it in their presence. Can you imagine that? Jesus is like, they're standing there and they don't know what to do. They're surprised. They're happy, but they're kind of confused. And Jesus says, look, you have something to eat. And the guy goes, here, some fish. Jesus eats it. Why did he do that? He said to them, look, I'm not a ghost. Because they were thinking, this is just a ghost. This is not real. This is just a figment of our imagination. It's just a ghost. And Jesus eats the fish. I'm just saying, ghosts don't eat broiled fish. Okay? Ghosts do not eat broiled fish. Jesus ate the fish to show them, I'm not just a spirit, an apparition. I'm real. I'm really alive. I'm really here. Now they were excited. They were joyful. Not long after that, they went to a place and watched him go up into the heavens. I mean, these guys are really excited. After Jesus went up into the heavens, it tells us in Luke 24:52 through 53, then they worshiped him and returned to Jerusalem with great joy. And they stayed continually at the temple, praising God. They didn't expect it to end this way, but the ending was better than they expected. And so they ended up going back and rejoicing. Now, there's joy in his coming. There's joy in his ministry. There's joy in his resurrection. But he's coming back. And so there's joy in his return. The disciples were looking for him to come back. We're looking for him to come back. And he is coming. One of these days. Advent is not just about him coming the first time as a baby. Advent is about us remembering that Jesus is coming again to take us home to be with him. Now that's something all of us are looking forward to. Before Jesus died, on the night before he was betrayed and crucified, he was trying to explain to his disciples about the fact that he was going to come back and get them again. That he was going to have to leave and he was going to have to come back. They were confused. They didn't understand it. And so he tried to explain it to them. So we're going to go to John 16:19. Jesus saw that they wanted to ask him about this. So he said to them, "Are you asking one another what I meant when I said, 'In a little while you will see me no more, and then after a little while you will see me'?" He knew that they were confused. He knew they were kind of questioning, what does he mean by this? But nobody had the guts to ask him, what do you mean? So Jesus says to them, verse 20, "Very truly I tell you, you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices." You will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. You think about that. When Jesus died on the cross, who was rejoicing? The Pharisees, Herod, religious leaders, some of the people. They were happy. They thought they had done the right thing. And they were rejoicing. But he said, you're going to be mourning. Those disciples were going to lose their master, their best friend, to an injustice. But then he says this, you will grieve, but your grief will turn to what? Joy. Your grief will turn to joy. They would not grieve forever. They would not mourn forever. But then they would understand, and when they realized that he was resurrected, it would be okay. Now, here's how he explains it. Verse 21. A woman giving birth to a child has pain because her time has come. But when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy that a child is born into the world. Now, I don't have any personal experience with this. My wife's laughing upstairs. She has personal experience with it. Only thing I can say is I can watch her face. And I can tell you she was in a lot of pain during labor. And I could just see it on her face. But the moment the baby is born, all of that is forgotten. Because when they take the baby and they give it to her, she's holding and looking at this little child. Wow. That's joy. That is incredible. For both parents to look at that baby that the two of you created, that God made. That's amazing. So all of the pain and the suffering of the delivery is erased when, well, I don't know how much of it's erased. I can't really speak to this. So I don't even know what I'm talking about. But from what I'm told, it's erased when you see that precious baby. There's so many good things to remember. And it's going to be that way with the disciples, Jesus says. It's going to be like that for you. This is going to be a hard trial. It's going to be miserable. But after it's over with, and you find out that I've risen from the dead, you're going to be so happy. And then one day, I'm going to come back, and I'm going to get you. Verse 22 says, so with you now is your time of grief, but I will see you again, and you will rejoice, and no one will take away your joy. No one will take away your joy. How would you like for no one to take away your joy? That's a good idea, isn't it? I think we need to understand the difference between joy and pleasure. Joy is something that is long-lasting and it's internal. Pleasure is something that's a strong hit, that's immediate, and it doesn't last very long. Like eating a chocolate bar. That's pleasure. Or pecan pie. Let's see, let's think of some more. How about lasagna? Who's getting hungry? I know I am. I better stop it. A milkshake. I mean, that's pleasure. It's like, it's an immediate hit of happiness. But the thing is, pleasure is connected with an object or an event. And once that passes, then the happiness is gone. But see, joy isn't connected with that. Joy is internal, not external. The pleasure is external because it's the milkshake, the chocolate bar, the whatever. Joy is something that's internal that doesn't depend on some external thing. And therefore, it can last longer. So what we can say in general is this. Pleasure is externally motivated. Joy is internally motivated. Pleasure is temporary and fleeting. Joy is longer lasting. Pleasure depends on circumstances. Joy does not depend on circumstances. You can still have joy even when the circumstances are bad. And that's what Jesus meant when he said, I'll give you joy that nobody can take away. Hey, even when these guys are chasing you down to kill you and stone you, you can still have joy inside. And that's why James could say, consider it pure joy, my friends, when you endure trials of all kinds. How can you have joy when you're in the middle of a trial? Because your joy is not dependent on your circumstances. The joy is connected instead with who God is and who we are in Him. When we understand that, the joy can be long-lasting. And it's the same thing about Christmas. If Christmas is about the external things, the presents, the lights, the food, the family, the parties, those are all external things and they create pleasure. And that's not a bad thing. It's okay. But if we want joy, we've got to connect Christmas with something more enduring than that. Something that lasts longer, something that can't just be taken out of our hand. And that is Jesus. When we connect Christmas with Jesus, we have internal joy that is long-lasting, it endures, and nobody's going to take it away from you. Real joy is not wrapped up in pretty paper and adorned with beautiful lights. Real joy doesn't come and go with the dates of the calendar. The joy that God gives lasts all year long. All year long. I'm excited about that. And one day, Jesus will come back. Just like He told His disciples, I'm coming back for you. He's coming back for us. Now, we're almost done, but I want to share with you the greatest joy of all. The greatest joy of all is not yours, and it is not mine. It is God's. The greatest joy of all is when you and I give our hearts to Him, and He rejoices over our salvation. That is the greatest joy. Luke 15:10 says this. In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. I was that one sinner. And when I repented, there was a party in heaven. And God jumped off His throne and said, yes! I think it happened that way. Anyways, God was excited about me getting saved. He had joy in His heart for my salvation. He set it all up. He paid the price for it. He orchestrated it. And when I said yes, it was the greatest day in His life. You say, well, aren't you overrating yourself a little bit? No, because He feels the same way about all of us. Every one of you, when you gave your heart to Him, it was a day of great joy for the King of all kings, the Lord of all lords, the Master of the universe. He rejoiced in your salvation. You are the apple of His eye. the joy of his life. Aren't you grateful for that? That in itself ought to give us a great deal of joy. I hope and I pray that we can learn to celebrate the holidays like Christmas and Easter and let the focus be more on the Lord and less on the other external things. I don't think we should get rid of the external things because I think they can help us to focus on the true meaning of Christmas or Easter or any other great holiday like that. So I'm okay with that, but I don't want us to go overboard with it. And I definitely don't want us to forget the real meaning, the real purpose of the holiday, and that is Jesus. Let's stand up and let's pray.